So the article about Hadad states that he was introduced at the Levant by the Amorites. So let's go into who the Amorites were or are. So the Amorites were an ancient Northwest Semitic-speaking Bronze Age people from the Levant, initially appearing in Sumerian records circa 2500 BC. They expanded and ruled most of the Levant, Mesopotamia, and parts of Egypt from the 21st century BC to the late 17th century BC. The Amorites established several prominent city-states in various locations, such as Isin, Kurta, Larsa, Marai, and Ebla, and later founded Babylon and the Old Babylonian Empire. They also founded the 14th dynasty of Egypt during the fragmented era of the Second Intermediate Period in the Nile Delta, which was characterized by rulers bearing Amorite names such as Yakbim, Sekhanri, and were likely part of the later Hyksos. The term Amurru in Akkadian and Sumerian texts refers to the Amorites, their principal deity, and an Amorite kingdom. The Amorites are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as inhabitants of Canaan, both before and after the conquest of the land under Joshua. In history, the 3rd millennium BC, it is thought that terms like Martu were used to represent what we now call the Amorites, and 2 Sumerian literary compositions written long afterward in the Old Babylonian period in Merkar and the Lord of Arata, and Lugal-Banda and the Anzu bird, the early dynastic ruler of Uruk in Markar, listed in the Sumerian king list, mentions the land of the Martu. It is not known to what extent these reflect historical facts. There are also sparse mentions about Amorites, often as Mardu, in tablets from the East Semitic-speaking kingdom of Ebla, dating from 2500 BC to the destruction of the city in circa 2250 BC. From the perspective of the Eblaites, the Amorites were a rural group living in the narrow basin of the middle and upper Euphrates in northern Syria. The Eblaites used the term Martu in an early time for a state and people east to the Ebla, around Emar and Tuttle, which means the name Amurru for the west is later than the name for the state or the people. For the Akkadian emperors of central Mesopotamian, Martu was one of the 4 quarters surrounding Akkad, along with Subartu, north, Sumer, south, and Elam, east. Naram Sid of Akkad records in a royal inscription defeating a coalition of Sumerian cities and Amorites near Jebel Bishri in northern Syria circa 2240 BC. His successor, Shar-Kali Shari, recorded in one of his year names in the year in which Zar-Kali Shari was victorious over Amurru in the Jebel Bishri. By the time of the last days of the 3rd dynasty of the immigrating Amorites had become such a force that kings such as Shusin were obliged to construct a 270-kilometer or 170-mile wall from the Tigris to the Euphrates to hold them off. The Amorites are depicted in contemporary records as nomadic tribes under chiefs who forced themselves into lands they needed to graze their herds. Some of the Akkadian literature of this era speaks disparagingly of the Amorites and implies that the Akkadian and Sumerian speakers of Mesopotamia viewed their nomadic and primitive way of life with disgust and contempt. In the Sumerian myth, Marriage of Martu, written early in the 2nd millennium BC, a goddess considering marriage to the god of the Amorites is warned. Now listen, their hands are destructive and their features are those of monkeys. An Amorite is one who eats what the moon god Nana forbids and does not show reverence. They never stop roaming about. They are an abomination to the gods' dwellings. Their ideas are confused. They cause only disturbance. The Amorite is clothed in sack leather, lives in a tent, exposed to wind and rain, and cannot properly recite prayers. Something about speech. He lives in the mountains and ignores the places of gods, digs up truffles in the foothills, does not know how to bend the knee in prayer, and eats raw flesh. He has no house during his life, and when he dies, he will not be carried to a burial place. My girlfriend, why would you marry Mar-2? As the centralized structure of the third dynasty of Ur slowly collapsed, the city-states of the south, such as Isin, Larsa, and Eshnuna, began to reassert their former independence, and the areas in the southern Mesopotamia with Amorites were no exception. Elsewhere, the armies of Elam were attacking and weakening the empire, making it vulnerable. Ur was eventually occupied by the Elamites. They remained until they were rejected by the Isin ruler Ishbi-Erra, which marked the beginning of the Isin-Larsa period. Second millennium BC. After the decline of Ur III, Amorite rulers gained power in a number of Mesopotamian city-states beginning in the Isin-Larsa period and peaking in the Old Babylonian period. In the north, the Amorite ruler of Ekalatum, Shamshi-Adad I, conquered Assur and formed the large, though short-lived kingdom of Upper Mesopotamia. In the south, Babylon became the major power under the Amorite ruler Sumula El and his successors, including the notable Hammurabi. Higher up the Euphrates, to the northwest, the Amorite kingdom of Marai arose, later to be destroyed by Hammurabi. Babylon itself would later be sacked by the Hittites, with its empire assumed by the Kassites. West of Marai, Yamhad ruled from its capital Halab, today's Aleppo, until it was destroyed by the Hittites in 16th century BC. The city of Ebla, under the control of Yamhad in this period, also had Amorite rulership. There is thought to have been an Amorite presence in Egypt from the 19th century BC. The 14th dynasty of Egypt, centered in the Nile Delta, had rulers bearing Amorite names such as Yakbim. Furthermore, increasing evidence suggests that the succeeding Hyksos of Egypt were an amalgam of peoples from Syria, of which the Amorites were also part. Based on temple architecture, Manfred Batak argues for strong parallels between the religious practices of the Hyksos at Avaris with those of the area around Byblos, Ugarit, Alalak, and Tel Brak, and defines the spiritual home of the Hyksos as in northernmost Syria and northern Mesopotamia, areas typically associated with Amorites at the time. In 1650 BC, the Hyksos established the 15th dynasty of Egypt and ruled most of Lower and Middle Egypt contemporaneously with the 16th and 17th dynasty of Thebes during the chaotic Second Intermediate period. Fall. In the 16th century BC, the Amorite era ended in Mesopotamia with the decline and fall of Babylon and other Amorite-ruled cities. The Kassites occupied Babylon and reconstituted it under the Kassite dynasty under the name of Kardunius around 1595 BC. In far southern Mesopotamia, the native First Sealand dynasty had reigned over the Mesopotamian marshes region until the Kassites brought the region under their control. In northern Mesopotamia, the power vacuum left by the Amorites brought the rise of the Mitanni, Hanig Albat, circa 1600 BC. From the 15th century BC onward, the term Amuru is usually applied to the region extending north of Canaan as far as Kadesh on the Orontes River in northern Syria. After the mid-2nd millennium BC, Syrian Amorites came under the domination of first the Hittites and, from the 14th century BC, the Middle Assyrian Empire. They then appear to have been displaced or absorbed by other semi-nomadic West Shemitic-speaking peoples known collectively as the Alamu during the Late Bronze Age collapse. The Aramaeans rose to be the prominent group among the Alamu. From circa 1200 BC onward, the Amorites disappeared from the pages of history, but the name reappeared in the Hebrew Bible. Language. The language was first attested in the 21st, 20th centuries BC and was found to be closely related to the Canaanite, Aramaic, and Samalian languages. In the 18th century BC at Marai, Amorite scribes wrote in an Eshnuna dialect of the East Semitic Akkadian language. Since the text contained Northwest Semitic forms, words, and constructions, the Amorite language is thought to be a Northwest Semitic language. The main sources for the extremely limited extant knowledge of the Amorite language are the proper names and loan words, not Akkadian in style, that are preserved in such text. Amorite proper names were found throughout Mesopotamia in the Old Babylonian period, as well as places as far as Alalak in Turkey and modern-day Bahrain or Del Moon. They are also found in Egyptian records. Ugaritic is also a Northwest Semitic language and is possibly an Amorite dialect. Religion. A bilingual list of the names of 10 Amorite deities alongside Akkadian counterparts from the Old Babylonian period was translated in 2022. These deities are as follows. Dagon, who is identified with Enlil. Dagon was the supreme god in many cities in the Euphrates region of Upper Mesopotamia, especially at sites such as Marai, Tuttle, and Turka. Babylonian texts refer to the chief god of the Amorites as Amuru. Martu, read as Ilu, Amuru, corresponding to their name for the ethnic group. They also identify his consort as the goddess Asratun. Camis or Camis, an otherwise poorly attested deity largely known from Akkadian and Amorite theophoric names. He was significant at Ebla, where a month was named after him. The bilingual identifies him with the god Ea, though other god lists identify him with Nergal. Asratum, whose name is cognate with Asherah and is identified with Belet Ili. Yarahum or Yarahum, the moon god, who is named Yarik. At Ugarit, he is identified with the god Sin. Rasapum, equated with Nergal and also known from Ebla. A god with an incompletely reconstructed name, possibly Arum, who is identified with Isum. Halamu, identified with Subula, a deity in the netherworld, God's circle. Hanatum, who is here identified with Ishtar. Pidre, previously known only from the Late Bronze Age Ugaritic text and later in the bilingual list, she is identified with Nanaya. Astiul Halti, who is identified with Istaran, the tutelary deity of the city of Dur. This list is not thought to represent a full Amorite pantheon, as it does not include important members such as the sun and weather deities. The biblical Amorites. The term Amorites is used in the Bible to refer to certain highlanders who inhabited the land of Canaan, described in Genesis as descendants of Canaan, the son of Ham. Genesis chapter 10, verse 16. This aligns with Akkadian and Babylonian traditions that equate Syro-Palestine with the land of the Amorites. They are described as a powerful people of great stature, like the height of the cedars, Amos chapter 2, verse 9, who had occupied the land east and west of the Jordan. The height and strength mentioned in Amos 2 verse 9 has led some Christian scholars, including Orville J. Nave, who wrote the Nave's Topical Bible, to refer to the Amorites as giants. In Deuteronomy, the Amorite king Og is described as the last of the remnant of the Rephaim, Deuteronomy 3 verse 11. The terms Amorite and Canaanite seem to be used more or less interchangeably, but sometimes Amorite refers to a specific tribe living in Canaan. The biblical Amorites seem to have originally occupied the region stretching from the heights west of the Dead Sea, Genesis chapter 14 verse 7, to Hebron, Genesis chapter 13 verse 8, Deuteronomy chapter 3 verse 8, chapter 4, verses 46 through 48, embracing all Gilead and all Bashan, Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 10, with the Jordan Valley on the east of the river, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 49. The land of the two kings of the Amorites, Sihon and Og, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 4, and Joshua chapter 2, verse 10, and chapter 9, verse 10. Sihon and Og were independent kings whose people were displaced from their land in battle with the Israelites. Numbers chapter 21, verses 21 through 35. Though in the case of the war led by Og, Bashan, it appears none of them survived, and the land became part of Israel. Numbers chapter 21, verse 35. The Amorites seem to have been linked to the Jerusalem region, and the Jebusites may have been a subgroup of them, Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 3. The southern slopes of the mountains of Judea are called the Mount of the Amorites, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 7, 19, and 20. The book of Joshua states the 5 kings of the Amorites were first defeated with great slaughter by Joshua in Joshua chapter 10, verse 5. Then more Amorite kings were defeated at the waters of Merom by Joshua in chapter 11, verse 8. It is mentioned that in the days of Samuel, there was peace between them and the Israelites in 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 14. The Gibeonites were said to be their descendants, being an offshoot of the Amorites who made a covenant with the Hebrews, 2 Samuel 21, verse 2. When Saul later broke that vow and killed some of the Gibeonites, God is said to have sent a famine to Israel in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1. In 2017, Philip Bostrom of Haaretz observed similarities between the Amorites and modern-day Jews, since both may have originated from a single spot, spread around their regions, and managed to stay distantly connected kinship-wise. He believes possibly either that Abraham was among the Amorites who migrated to the land of Israel around the same time of the destruction of the Sumerian capital Ur by Elamites in 1750 BCE. Or suggest continuity between the Bible's portrait of Israel's tribal organization and mobile herding background and that of the Amorites. Nonetheless, the Bible writers only applied the Amorite ethnonym to Canaanite nations existing pre-Israelite conquest. According to biblical scholar Daniel E. Fleming, reasons for biblical appearances include a polemical desire to use the stereotypes present in the Sumerian myth, marriage of Martu, and the explaining the acquisition of current territory, caveating both that the lack of evidence of biblical writers having access to contemporaneous texts describing the historical past of Amorites may result in only historical interest from their use of the ethnonym. Origin. There are a wide range of views regarding the Amorite homeland. One extreme is the view that Ker Martu, Mot Amorim covered the whole area between the Euphrates and the Mediterranean Sea, the Arabian Peninsula included. The most common view is that the homeland of the Amorites was a limited area in central Syria, identified with the mountainous region of Jebel Bishri. The Amorites are regarded as one of the ancient Semitic-speaking peoples. Ancient DNA analysis on 28 human remains dating to the Middle and Late Bronze Age from ancient Alalak, an Amorite city with a Hurrian minority, found that the inhabitants of Alalak were a mixture of Copper Age Levantines and Mesopotamians and were genetically similar to contemporaneous Levantines. The view that Amorites were fierce and tall nomads led to an anachronistic theory among some racialist writers in the 19th century that they were a tribe of Aryan warriors who at one point dominated the Israelites. This belief, which originated with Felix von Luschan, fit models of Indo-European migrations posited during his time, but Luschan later abandoned that theory. Houston Stewart Chamberlain claims that King David and Jesus were both Aryans of Amorite extraction. The argument was repeated by the Nazi ideologue Alfred Rosenberg. So now that we see that the Amorites, according to this article, says that they originally occupied the region stretching from the heights west of the Dead Sea to Hebron, we are now going to read a book that I found in one of the book boxes around here. And it's called Once There Were Giants: How Tiny Hebron Won the Illinois High School Basketball Championship and the Hearts of Fans Forever by Scott Johnson and Julie Kitzler. And it is based on Hebron, Illinois. And as I have stated in other videos, that the Calumet River was once said to be likened to that of the River Jordan. So stay tuned.